Thank you. I am here again with Ethan. And Ethan, let's go over some of these injuries here for Week 4. Let's start with Cam Newton. Really, to me, was very alarming. They ruled him out right away for Week 4. I mean, pretty much Week 3 had just ended, and they ruled him out for Week 4. Something tells me that this is going to be a longer injury than many people think. What's going on with Cam Newton? How long can we expect him to miss?
So last week we talked about Cam, and everyone I think was under the impression that this was still just a foot sprain, which is what they described his preseason injury as. They said he re-aggravated it. It has come out since then that he's actually dealing with a Lisfranc injury, which is much more significant than just your typical foot sprain. A Lisfranc injury is basically a broken bone in the foot, in the outside of the foot, that it's not the pinky toe itself. It's the long bone that attaches to the bones of the pinky toe. And what happens is it's on the outside of the foot. You plant too hard, and then that bone can crack. This is one that's very common with wide receivers when they plant too hard. It's one that many players have dealt with over the years, and it's almost always usually repaired with this. Basically, they take a big screw and just fixate that bone and let it heal. And then that becomes its own separate issue down the road because the screw can bend, and then you got to go back in and take the screw out. But those things aren't happening with Cam. They're actually not opting for surgery with him, which is a good sign for fantasy owners because surgery means probably a trip to the IR. No surgery means that the fracture of the Lisfranc injury is not as significant as what you had. Oh, shit. I fucked this all up. I'm sorry. I'm tired.
Okay.
I'm thinking of a Jones fracture, and I literally just described a Jones fracture to you.
All right. So let's
just restart the thing. I'm sorry.
Let's do it. All right, guys. So thank you again. I'm here with Ethan. Ethan, let's break down these injuries here for Week 4. One of the ones I really want to start with is Cam Newton. It was alarming to me right after Week 3. It didn't take long for them to rule Cam Newton out for Week 4. I know that we talked about this previously, but what's going on with Cam Newton and what's going on with his injury? How long are we expecting him to miss here?
So with Cam, I think the real issue here is that we were all under the impression that this was a foot sprain. That was what they told us in the preseason when he injured his foot initially. That's what they told us after Week 3 when he played not very well, after Week 2 when he played not very well, and then we found out that he re-aggravated this injury. The problem is that now they're saying that this is actually a Lisfranc injury, and a Lisfranc injury is much more significant than just a foot sprain. It can be a sprain of the foot, but it could also be a dislocation. It could also be a fracture. A lot of times Lisfranc injuries, what happens is the long bones of the foot become displaced or dislocated. A lot of times they can fracture or chip. And what happens is that what you have to do to fix that is basically go in and place a plate in the foot and fixate everything down so that it heals correctly. Now, with Cam's situation, they're actually choosing not to have surgery, which means this is probably one of the more on the minor end of Lisfranc injuries, which is still a significant injury. Don't get me wrong, but it's not displaced to the point where they're going to have to go in and replace it with plates and screws and all of that. Definitely going to be out Week 4, like you said. They were pretty quick. That's never a good sign when a team immediately calls for a guy to be out the following week. The reason that's always concerning is because there's no competitive advantage for the Panthers to immediately declare, oh yeah, Cam's definitely not playing this week. I'm always interested when I see that because that tells me that it was going to be very obvious that he was not going to play this week, to the point where the team said, well, we're just going to announce it now so that nobody has to, it's not a distraction for us going forward. Kyle Allen played very well, so I don't expect them to be clamoring for Cam Newton to come back super soon. The fact that he's not having surgery means, a 4 to 6 week time frame is probably right up the correct alley here with this. Bones, if there is a fracture or a hairline fracture involved with this particular Lisfranc injury, again, not all of them do. Bones take 6 weeks to heal. So very high chance of re-injury with this. We've already seen him re-injure it once. I think that the team is going to be extra super cautious as long as Daniel Jones is, or not, sorry, not Daniel Jones, as long as Kyle Allen is playing well. And I think that what you're going to see is an extended absence for Cam. So, not what you want to hear from fantasy perspective, but it is what it is. At least they're being a little bit more upfront with us than they were in the preseason.
Yes, and Kyle Allen, like you mentioned, playing so well his first outing here. He played Week 17 last year too and got a win. As a matter of fact, interesting stat: the only 2 wins in the last 10 games for the Carolina Panthers are games started by Kyle Allen. So it's definitely an interesting trend there. However, I do think that you're right. Them being that transparent that early was alarming to me. It showed me something, and you're right. And it just was that obvious. I'm sure that he was going to miss the game, that they didn't even want to try to mess around with it. Let's just announce it early in the week and just move on. So let's talk about another guy, a guy who people have been relying on, a guy who was drafted pretty early in a lot of fantasy drafts, and that's T.Y. Hilton. Looks like he's suffering from a little bit of an injury here. What do we expect from T.Y.? Is he going to miss a significant amount of time, or is he going to be available this week? What do we expect from his injury?
So Hilton is dealing with a quadricep strain. It's a re-injury from week 2 that he re-aggravated in week 3. Obviously playing very well in that game in week 3 before he went out. I think he had 60 plus yards and a touchdown in the first half. So he was on his way to a big game, but he kind of limps off the field. It clearly re-aggravated it. And the problem is that the team was worried that he had completely torn his quad. That tells me that it was very significant strain. A strain just means a tear. So the quad is still torn, but it's not completely ruptured, which is the point where it's completely torn all the way through. There is some type of tear or stretch on that muscle. I don't expect Hilton, that is, to be back this week. I honestly could see the team kind of waiting until week 7. They have a bye in week 6. If they can hold off this week and next week, they're going to get them an extra week off. So we're talking 3 weeks possibly with no Hilton. Not that you would have had him on the bye anyway, but with a strain like this, I think if they don't give him enough time, you're really putting him at risk of an even more significant tear, one that could require surgery. So I think the team's going to be cautious with him, and I think you're going to probably miss out on him for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, and before I say this, T.Y. is one of my favorite players to watch, and I definitely don't want to see anybody get hurt. But you're telling me that I could fire up my Deion Kane shares for a couple of weeks and maybe get some fantasy points out of it. I might be okay with that.
I mean, I think that's a reasonable pivot, at least in my eyes. It is.
Okay, fair enough. As long as I got that a reasonable pivot, I'll take that. So let's go to the next receiver that's injured, and it's another guy people have been relying on week in and week out, and he suffered an injury that people aren't really sure what to make out of it. So what's going on with Julian Edelman? What do we make out of this injury? Is he going to miss time, or what's going on here?
Yeah, Edelman going down really hurt a few of my teams. Thought that we were going to be looking at broken ribs. The x-rays came back negative, so he's dealing with some type of rib bruising. Not to say that is a good thing, but it's definitely better than if he had broken ribs. Broken ribs are extremely painful. Any kind of rib injury is not a good thing for football players, because you have to breathe to play football, and you're usually breathing very heavy. So every breath hurts when you have a rib injury. So this is not ideal for Edelman. The good news is that he's limited this week, but he is practicing. I do expect him to play on Sunday. I don't expect a full-blown workload. This could be something that bothers him throughout the game. He takes a little bit more rest. Again, as he breathes heavy, that injury could continue to bother him. I still think he's going to be a startable fantasy asset, because Tre'Davious White is probably matching up with Josh Gordon for the majority of this game. Brady is going to be looking for those short crossing routes, and that Edelman loves to catch about 15 of those in games like this. The Bills defense is deceptively good. So I expect Edelman to be definitely playable in fantasy this week, despite the injury.
Yeah, everything you're telling me here sounds like we can go on Edelman, and it sounds like maybe a James White week 2 with him coming back now. So that's interesting. It's definitely something to monitor. with Julian Edelman. So Vance McDonald, let's go to him and the Steelers. Looks like he got hurt, and this was one of the pieces of that offense that I have heavy ownership of. He's represented on a lot of my rosters, and so I'm definitely curious, and I think a lot of other people are. What do we expect from Vance McDonald? Is he going to miss a lot of time, or can we expect him coming back in the near future with this injury?
Vance is a tough one for me too, because I think he showed you what he could be in week 2, and then of course you start him in week 3 and he gets hurt. That seems to be the Vance McDonald way. But he is dealing with a shoulder injury. I think it's an AC joint sprain. So your acromioclavicular joint, which is just basically the joint where your clavicle attaches to the point of your shoulder. There is some optimism that he will play this week. I believe they play on Monday night, so he gets an extra day to kind of rest up on this. But the team did trade for Nick Vannett. And I always say that the teams will not tell you much about injuries, but they can tell you a lot about them based on the moves that they make. So I think that trade for Nick Vannett was not a direct replacement for McDonald, because it sounds like he could still suit up this week, but they're definitely planning for him to not be at 100%, and they wanted more depth at the position. I think that Vance probably sits this week, even though there is some optimism that he plays. So for me, I'm preparing a backup. I'm probably not even getting to the point because he's playing on Monday. I probably don't even get to the point where I'm picking another tight end from that game. I think I'm probably just playing somebody that plays on Sunday and avoiding the risk altogether.
Yeah, you nailed it. That was my concern, is somebody playing on Monday night. If they're a true game time decision, it's difficult to wait because you just don't have any other options if they do sit, right? So either that or you have to pick somebody else up from that team or whoever they're playing, and it just doesn't sound like that's a nice alternative here. Nick Vannett just coming in, not knowing the system very much, and I don't know that there's anybody else that I would trust on either of those teams that would be available on the waiver wire, right? So probably the safe route, it sounds like, is to start somebody Sunday. Don't wait till Monday. Mark Andrews, another guy who I have rostered all over the place. What's going on with him? Is he going to miss this week? Is he going to miss multiple weeks, or can I expect him to be there this week?
So Andrews has been dealing with a foot injury kind of throughout this season, and this is pretty par for the course for him to not practice on Wednesday and Thursday, just giving that foot some more time to heal. He hasn't missed any games so far with this. I don't expect him to miss this game on Sunday. His play is not as explosive as it was maybe the first couple weeks, so it could very well be bothering him a bit. He did play on Sunday, but I think he played behind Boyle and Hayden Hurst as far as getting into the game. So not ideal for Andrews as far as being that elite top tight end option, but the longer that this foot issue has to heal, the better. So I still think he's startable in fantasy because the chance that offense blows up, it just seems like every week those chances look pretty good. So I think Andrews is startable, but again, if he has another down week, he could just be still getting over this foot injury.
Okay, so at least we kind of know this is kind of par for the course. This has been, he's missed practice on Wednesday and Thursday with this foot injury as of late. So it's nothing too alarming yet, but definitely something for us to monitor. Let's finish this off with Devin Singletary. We talked about him last week. This was a young running back that didn't get a ton of work, but when he did get work, he looked really good. He looked the part. What's going on with Devin Singletary? Is he going to be back this week, or can we expect another heavy dose of Frank Gore?
So Singletary is still dealing with that hamstring strain. He did get some limited practices in this week. Last week, I didn't expect him to play. He didn't end up playing, but this week he is getting some practice in. I expect him to play this week, but I still think he's going to be limited as far as his workload. They're not ready to open up the reins to him completely. So Frank Gore, I think, is still startable as a touchdown guy if you need an RB3 and RB4 or a flex. I still expect Gore to carry the majority of the work, but I think you're going to see Singletary sprinkled in as this game goes along, assuming that hamstring stays healthy and doesn't bother him.
Yeah, that's one of those things that can just kind of tighten up at any given time, right? Or can kind of flare up or be re-injured.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a chance if he yeah, as soon as they're most likely to re-injure it as soon as you come back. So as soon as he opens up on Sunday, say he gets finds a hole and really gets to explode out of it, there's a chance that will re-aggravate that hamstring, and then they'll pull him for the rest of the game. So there's some risk with Singletary. I don't think I'd be starting him in fantasy. Again, I still think you can rely on Gore to get some work. I don't like this matchup a whole lot for either of them, to be honest. I think that the Pats are going to pretty much steamroll this offense, and they're going to try to rely on Josh Allen to carry the load. And I don't know if that's always the best bet against the Patriots. So again, I'm probably staying away from both, but I think Gore has more value this week.
Yeah, that's been the case with that Patriots defense all year long. So, Ethan, thank you again so much for breaking down the injuries with us. We appreciate it as always, my man. And we will again talk later in the week, I'm sure. Thanks again.
Yep. Thanks for having me.